Hey YouTube. I felt led to make a video about a very controversial topic, and that's the case of Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely. For those of you unfamiliar with this, it's a case of self-defense to some and outright murder to others. After following the case for a while and doing my own research, I truly believe that Daniel Penny is 100% guilt-free, and I'd like to explain why. For those who don't know, my name is Blue, and I'm a Florida police officer with over 10 years of experience. We talk all things true crime here, so consider subscribing if you enjoy that type of content. But with all that said, let's start with the background of our subjects, Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely. Daniel Penny is a 26-year-old student who was studying architecture at the New York City College of Technology with plans to transfer to another school. He was living in an apartment in the East Village, teaching swim lessons at a gym, and working at a restaurant in Brooklyn. This comes after Penny was honorably discharged from the Marines after 4 years of serving as an infantryman and squad leader. Jordan Neely was a 30-year-old man who, for a long period of time leading up to his death, was homeless. Jordan struggled greatly with mental illness. This illness, according to family members, came on when Jordan was just 14 years old, after his mother was brutally murdered. Jordan worked as a street performer and dancer, according to sources online. Jordan also had been arrested over 40 times for various charges. We'll get more into that in a little bit. Now, I'm sure there is a world of information on both of these men, but for the purposes of this intro, we'll be brief. With that out of the way, let's talk about the moments leading up to Jordan's death. The date is May 1st, 2023. Daniel, along with over a dozen other passengers, were on a subway car. Daniel is planning on going to the gym. As the doors are closing, they were forced open at the last minute, and thus entered Jordan Neely. According to witnesses, it was immediately apparent that something was wrong. Jordan was shouting and appeared aggressive. Freelance journalist Juan Vasquez, who witnessed the incident, said that Jordan was shouting, "I don't have food, I don't have a drink, I'm fed up. I don't mind going to jail and getting life in prison. I'm ready to die." Another witness heard Jordan say, "Someone is going to die today." Here's a short video showing some of this taken by a passenger, where Jordan appears to be agitated, pacing in place and rambling. It's a little hard to make out, but it sounds like he's talking about food.
I need the shelter and drinks. Food, thirsty, and milk. TV, Popeyes, thirsty and shelter. Milk, TV, and drinks. That's what happens. Thirsty and milk. Food, hungry. That's what's going on. Shelter and drinks. Thirsty and milk. Food, TV, Popeyes. Thirsty and drink. TV, milk. Thirsty and food. Drink hungry. I need to survive. Milk, shelter. Drink hungry. That's what happens.
Shortly after this, according to Vasquez, Jordan takes his jacket off and slams it violently on the ground, hard enough that he says you could hear the zipper slam into the metal on the floor. This caused other passengers to move away from him, a totally understandable reaction. Despite this, Jordan, again according to numerous witnesses, continues to threaten other people, telling them that he is going to kill them, and that someone is going to die today. According to multiple witnesses, Jordan was making half-lunge movements towards other passengers, and was reportedly less than half a foot away from multiple passengers while he was doing this. One witness, a mother and her small child who she had with her in a stroller, stated Jordan was charging at people, causing her to shield her child out of fear for her and her child's safety. She even stated that based on Jordan's threats and actions, she feared she might die. At some point during all this, Jordan was also allegedly throwing trash at people. At this point, Daniel steps in. Remember, the accounts I just gave you are from multiple people who reside in New York City and routinely take the subways there. As the prosecution would later try to use against Daniel, seeing mentally ill homeless people is rather commonplace on the subway, and they argued in essence that because of that, Daniel and the passengers should have had a less reasonable fear of harm from Jordan than they otherwise would have in another environment. An absolutely ridiculous argument to make. But back to my point. Based on the accounts I've given you, it's the absolute truth to state that Jordan was making threats to kill passengers, charging or lunging at people, and causing people to flee from him. He even makes a mother shield her child, and that mother again says she thinks she's going to die. Everyone here has a well-founded fear for their safety, something any reasonable person would agree with. Daniel, also someone who would have a well-founded fear based on Jordan's threats and actions, decides to step in. In his own words, he didn't want to see Jordan hurt anyone, and he jumped to try and restrain Jordan until the police could arrive. According to our witness Vasquez, he sees Daniel walk up behind Jordan and grab him around the neck, and at some point they both fall to the ground. While on the ground, he sees Daniel using his legs to try and restrain Jordan's legs. Let's begin our time frame here. Take a look at this graphic. Jordan gets into the car at the 2nd Avenue station, just before it began to depart. According to Vasquez, as all this is taking place, from the moment he saw Daniel grab Jordan around the neck and try to restrain him, to the time they arrived at the Broadway Lafayette stop, approximately 30 seconds had passed. Now at this point, everyone who can clears the car. But most, if not all the passengers were in total agreement with Daniel's actions, and some even forced the train to stay stopped by keeping the doors open, as Daniel and the others repeatedly asked for someone to call the police. And this is where Vasquez begins to film. I'm going to show you the footage, which is a little over 3 minutes long. I may stop it along the way to point a few important things out, but be advised this footage may be distressing to some of you. Now you'll notice for the first few seconds, it appears that Jordan is unconscious. I have personally seen people say that this proves that it was murder. This is incorrect. What it actually proves is that despite that hold being used, Jordan was actively struggling, as you see him do after the first 10 seconds or so. Here I can speak from my own law enforcement experience. When you're physically fighting with someone, it is not at all uncommon for them to go through periods of thrashing, violent struggle, to then taking a short rest and becoming relatively motionless, before entering another thrashing period. Keep that in mind as the video goes on.
Where are the cops? The cops.
Somebody call cops.
As you can see, Daniel is clearly, by his facial expressions, struggling greatly to restrain Jordan. Despite his advantageous position, Jordan has been and continues to fight back. Now there are two others attempting to help Daniel restrain Jordan, and you can see how difficult it is for the second person to try and get Jordan's hand behind his back. Notice this, he went from initially not moving much in the beginning of the video to struggling strongly. And now he appears to stop struggling for a second time. An onlooker appears to tell the men restraining Jordan to stop or lighten up, something to that effect. This is because, based on the stain on the butt of Jordan's pants, it appears that he had soiled himself. According to the man helping Daniel restrain Jordan, he remarks that it's an old stain. For those who are not in frequent contact with homeless individuals, you can absolutely tell the difference, especially as close as they are to Jordan. This same man states he's not squeezing, referring to Daniel. In legal terms, he's basically saying they are using a level of force reasonable to restrain Jordan, not an excessive amount of force. The onlooker even comments, if he shit himself, let him go, so you don't catch a murder charge. At the 2-minute and 26-second mark during this interaction, pay close attention to Jordan's right leg. It is moving, and he even lifts it backwards, up off of the ground. Again, at this time, the man helping Daniel states he's not squeezing.
My wife is ex-military. You got a hell of a chuckle, man. Just like
don't put him on his back, though, man. He might choke on his own spit. He might choke on his own spit and put him on his back. He's on the side, man.
Baby, he wasn't playing no game. He had the same chokehold that you got. Yo, that's nice, yo. You hear me? You a hell of a restrainer. My wife is really strong. Desert Storm. Military. Marine. You really got that chokehold. Once you defecate, you gotta let him go. Alright? If you didn't, you send his old is over. You'll be alright. Go on do today, homie. Huh? Yo, baby, the same chokehold that you put his ass all the way out with.
At 2 minutes and 56 seconds, Daniel releases Jordan and gets up. At this time, Daniel moves to Jordan's feet, while he and this other man begin to move Jordan into what's called a recovery position. For those who don't know, this is a position where you move unconscious people into, characterized by placing them on their side. One arm goes under their head for support, and the outer leg is bent and moved forward. This is so the person does not move, and if they vomit, it ensures their airway stays open and unobstructed, preventing you from aspirating. Again, right at the tail end of the video, Jordan is moving and breathing. Now, if we are to believe Vasquez's statement about the struggle lasting 30-ish seconds prior to their arrival at the station, and the struggle on video lasting 2 minutes and 56 seconds before Daniel releases his hold, that gives us a total time of just under 3.5 minutes. But let's be generous and assume that it took Vasquez 30 additional seconds from their arrival at the station to start recording. That's still a total time of just under 4 minutes, which is consistent with Daniel's own claim that it lasted less than 5 minutes. Prosecutors, however, say it lasted 6, but both of those claims go against multiple false claims that Jordan was held like this for 15 minutes. Here is a second video from a different angle. I'm not sure exactly when it was taken, but based on the fact that no one appears to be helping Daniel yet, I think it's safe to assume that this may have been taken just before the video taken by Vasquez. If that is true, that would mean we could add about 1 minute to our time, meaning the struggle elapsed in just under 5 minutes. This entire thing ends right around 2:30. Police say they received a call about a fight on a train at 2:27 p.m. and arrived right at 2:30 p.m. 911 also received multiple calls regarding Jordan, which came in as a homeless man that was found to be threatening in his mannerisms and volume, which is a poetic way of describing what we know from our previous witness statements. Let's take a look at video of the scene once police arrived.
Anything on him?
What's that?
You got anything on him or no?
I don't know.
Yo, my man.
I just put him out.
Yo. Oh. We get a bus. No firearm. You got a pulse or no?
I feel a pulse.
You feel a pulse? Keep breathing, right?
Now, this is important. Notice the police state that Jordan not only has a pulse, but that he is breathing. Even in the video of the main incident we just reviewed, you can see Jordan move of his own accord right at the end. So what happened? Why did Jordan Neely die? And what happened next? Well, naturally, in a case like this, once Jordan had died, police interviewed Daniel, who gave them his account of what happened. In this account, he even demonstrated for them the type of hold he used on Jordan, which is commonly referred to as a chokehold. But that is often confused with what is known as a vascular neck restraint, something designed to impede the blood flow to the brain, resulting in a loss of consciousness. However, that's not what happened here. If that had been applied correctly, Jordan would have lost consciousness in seconds and recovered just as fast once the hold was released. Here's an example.
Relax. Breathe.
This struggle took place for several minutes. Generally speaking, death from strangulation happens when someone has been choked for a long time after the loss of consciousness, depriving the brain of oxygen. But in most choking cases, we tend to see a lot of damage to the victim's trachea. So what did the medical examiner's report say at autopsy? Dr. Cynthia Harris, the city medical examiner who performed Neely's autopsy, concluded that Jordan's death was so-called an asphyxial death as a result of the chokehold, which she would later testify to jurors. Now, based on the multiple witness accounts, video footage available, and Daniel's own account of what happened, detectives did not arrest him. However, based on the findings at autopsy, which came later, prosecutors sent the case before a grand jury, who came back with 2 possible charges that Daniel could be found guilty of: second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. And with this, the case against Daniel Penny began. Now, in order to prove their case, prosecutors must prove the following for a conviction of second-degree manslaughter. They must prove that the accused, Daniel, recklessly caused the death of another, without intent to cause the death. According to New York law, reckless in this case is defined as being aware that your actions present a substantial risk that someone could be killed and disregarding that risk. In my opinion, this is not at all present based on what we've just reviewed. But what about the second charge? A criminally negligent homicide conviction would require proof that the defendant's actions unjustifiably risked Jordan's death, but without awareness of the danger. Again, not something that is obvious based on the totality of circumstances. And I hear what you're saying, but what about the medical examiner's report? Doesn't it prove that Neely was strangled, and that's the sole reason he died? Well, according to the defense, who asked for a second opinion, no. Dr. Satish Chandru disputed a New York City medical examiner's determination that Daniel Penny's chokehold is what killed Jordan. Dr. Satish has worked as a medical examiner in both Florida and Texas, and the doctor agrees with Daniel's lawyers, who throughout the trial have been claiming that the pressure on Jordan's neck was not consistent enough to result in his death. According to the doctor, Jordan died from the combined effects of synthetic marijuana, schizophrenia, his struggle and restraint, and a blood condition that can lead to fatal complications during physical exertion. Now, this blood condition has been reported as being sickle cell syndrome. Let's get technical for a minute. In a paper published by the National Athletic Trainers Association, they outline the risks and sudden deaths that can and have occurred for individuals with sickle cell syndrome. During intense or extensive exertion, the sickle hemoglobin can change the shape of red cells from round to quarter moon or sickle-shaped. This change, which is called exertional sickling, can pose a grave risk for some athletes. In the past 7 years, exertional sickling has killed 9 athletes, ages 12 through 19. To illustrate, sickle cells can logjam blood vessels and lead to collapse from the rapid breakdown of muscles starved of blood. Obviously, this is very dangerous, as the heart itself is a muscle. This can happen in as little as 2 to 3 minutes of hard physical exertion beginning, and if the exertion continues, it can be fatal. In the case of Jordan, if this is true as the doctor has said it is, then it's a major win for the defense. And so the argument will be made that Jordan, a deeply mentally disturbed man, had died due to a combination of a sickle cell syndrome, untreated mental illness, drug use from synthetic marijuana, and the minutes-long struggle with Daniel. But the defense also argued that Daniel had not gotten into the struggle with Jordan for no reason. Rather, he had acted to save the lives of those Jordan was threatening, including a mother and a young child. Many people, the defense argued, saw Daniel as a hero. Ultimately, on December 3rd, after closing arguments were made, the jury began their deliberations. On December 6th, the jury announced that they were deadlocked and they could not reach a verdict. Despite being ordered to spend more time in deliberations, they remained deadlocked, and in a major victory for Daniel, and in my opinion justice overall, the second-degree manslaughter charge was dismissed. At the time of this video, the only charge Daniel faces now is criminally negligent homicide, a charge that carries a maximum of 4 years in prison. This is a charge that Daniel's defense attorneys remain confident they can beat, but that remains to be seen, as jury deliberations will continue on Monday, December 9th. Let's talk about where the system failed both Jordan and Daniel. In cases like this, we often assign blame based on what we see, without looking at how it ever got to that point. In this case, we can safely say that Daniel never should have ever even been in a position to have to step in and restrain Jordan, in a world where our systems worked. As we said before, Jordan had over 40 arrests, and yet he was still walking the streets, free to harass and threaten whoever he wanted, with seeming immunity, not on probation or any kind of supervised release. Don't believe me? Here's a few recent examples. In 2021, Jordan punched a 67-year-old woman in the face, unprovoked. This punch broke the woman's nose and fractured her orbital bone. And what was the price Jordan had to pay for this crime? In February of 2022, Jordan pleads guilty, and in exchange is offered a 15-month alternative to incarceration plan, where he must abstain from drugs and stay in a treatment facility. This would result in the felony assault charge being dropped down to a misdemeanor, but of course, he left the facility, and a warrant was issued. This warrant, by the way, was still active at the time of his death. Had he been locked up, Jordan would very likely still be alive today. In addition to this plea deal I mentioned, 3 of his prior cases were dismissed with no conditions. In one instance, Jordan pulled his pants down and exposed himself to a woman on the subway. In a second, he hit yet another woman in the face. And in a third instance, he violated a protective order. All charges dismissed. In 2019, he punches a homeless man in the face, again unprovoked, who had just been looking for food. A month prior to that, he punched another man in the face and broke his nose. Would you believe that this attack also was unprovoked? He took a plea deal for both of those cases and was sentenced to a simple 6 months in jail. Now, if your argument is that Jordan was so mentally ill that he should not be held responsible for his actions, then I'll grant you that for the sake of argument. But that changes nothing. If this is the case, then why is Jordan walking around a free man and not under psychiatric care? I mean, just look at the condition he was in on this night. He complained of being hungry and thirsty, with nowhere to go. He was rambling and screaming at people, threatening them and throwing trash at them. He was walking around with a literal feces stain on his pants. Why was he treated like this by New York's social services system? According to his records, he was listed as often refusing help, despite being in major need of mental health and social services. This is why we have involuntary examinations, like Florida's Baker Act law. And yet, that is just a revolving door for the mentally ill. Many of these people need long-term treatment and must be forcibly kept at treatment facilities, like old world asylums, in order to get it. I'm going to vent here, but just look at what happened after Jordan's death. At his funeral, there were a reported 200 people in attendance, including politicians like AOC. This doesn't even account for the protesters who were calling for justice for Jordan. The justice Jordan deserves is at the feet of the social services that failed him, in the hands of politicians who, under the guise of freedom and rights, leave our mentally ill in the streets in such deplorable conditions. Jordan should never have been walking in the streets as he was. And of course, as it is in most cases, Jordan, who for all intents and purposes appears to have been thrown away by what family he did have, has family come out of the woodwork after his death. Keep in mind, after his mother was murdered, it was reported that he went into a group home, per his aunt. After he aged out, he spent much of his adult life on and off again homeless, with his mental health worsening. According to numerous articles, his aunt and friends have commented that Jordan struggled with homelessness for years, even during high school. His father would also speak out, saying Jordan was never the same after his mother was murdered by her boyfriend. But that leads to the next question. Where were these people in Jordan's life? Where was his father, his aunt, his friends? The aunt has launched a GoFundMe. The father is suing Daniel. But where were these people for over a decade? I see it time and time again. Someone dies after years of living a horrific life, crippled by drug abuse or mental illness. They're left on their own and often forgotten about entirely, until they die in some unfortunate event and there is somebody to sue. This person who you would see sleeping on the sidewalk, covered in their own urine and feces, often not eating for days at a time, suddenly they're surrounded by loving friends and family. Now, I don't know the absolute truth behind Jordan's relationship with his family, but I know enough to know he was failed on multiple levels. Failed by family, failed by friends, failed by the New York mental health system, and failed by the criminal justice system. The same criminal justice system that failed Daniel. If the state of New York had pursued charges against Jordan for his 40 arrests as strongly as they had against Daniel, it's very likely Jordan could have been put in a long-term psychiatric care facility, which very well may have saved his life. Instead, we'll never know. One life lost and another forever changed. Just another day in America. Until next time, guys.